Hello, this is the first story of many that I wish to share with you. This is a story about two angels that I saw, that saw me too, that looked right. Our eyes met for a long time, and it's truly amazing. And I'm talking about angels, not clouds or things that could be mistaken for something else. So, this starts out in the Sandia Mountains in New Mexico, outside of Albuquerque. I was 4 or 5 years old, and I remember my parents were out we're having a picnic, and my dad used to like to go out to the mountains back then, and he'd take us out there, and I remember my mom and dad were trying to get a barbecue coal started, and they were young then, and so at any rate, my brother and I wandered off, and there was a huge stream. It was more than a creek, but less than a river, so I guess a stream. And my younger brother was there with me, and we were splashing around on the river's edge, the stream bank. And the stream bank maybe was that far from the water, so we're, bending over and we're looking at the little fish and whatever guppies in there, and wonderment, this brand new world. When you're a little kid, everything is so wonderful and can be so terrible. But in this case, we're splashing around with sticks in the water while my mom and dad were down the stream a ways struggling to get a barbecue started. So my brother, younger than me, leaned a little too far over with his stick and toppled head first into the stream. And the water perhaps was not even waist deep at this point, but to a little kid it was probably very dangerous. And he started yelling. I didn't need to yell to my mom, because he started yelling and splashing around the water, and my mother stopped what she was doing, came running over, jumped right in the stream. She can hardly walk now, but she came in a sprint, leapt in the stream and fished him out. My father, probably like what I would do, stood there and still with a barbecue trying to get things going. So she come out of the stream with him, and she yelled at me why did I take him near the stream edge, and I'm telling her I didn't, this and that, and she said stay away from the water, and went back with my crying brother to my father. And then they got in an argument about, as I recall, why didn't he come running quicker? Why did he just stand there? I remember the argument. I remember that day very well. So I'm standing at the stream's edge, and I look up upstream, not to the direction my parents were behind me, but upstream. It had the mountains in the background, and these two men were standing there in the stream, side by side, and they were as tall as the trees. That's to say they're 20 feet tall or better. And the first thing I noticed, other than they were tall, was their robes were white and shining. And I'm talking brilliantly white. There's no purity on this earth as white as those robes were. Not a wrinkle, not a blemish, nothing. And then I noticed the look in their eyes as they looked at me, and it was pure love, and there's humor in it. I'm talking the sort of humor that kind of want to laugh at you, but a good-natured humor. And these two men were just staring at me, and they were tall, powerfully built. One had a sash of green around his waist, the other of brown. I guess you could say they were Caucasian to look at. I've got other stories of the angels that may be a little different, but these men were Caucasian, shoulder length, brown hair, blondish brown, very radiant. If I was to place a year to them, I'd say they were 25 to 30. Obviously they were older than the stars. God said he created the angels a little above men, and they were very vibrant and very powerfully built and very pure. And I stared at them, and they stared back, both of them, just smiling at me. And I remember I turned to my mother to tell her to come look at this. And of course, when I looked back, they were gone. And I remember how heartbroken I felt, because it was so wonderful to see these two magnificent beings, angels. And my mom and dad were still arguing. They weren't interested in anything I was seeing. And they told me to come on. The picnic was over. You know, they gave it up for the day. They didn't argue much. I want to say that they didn't argue much in my life. They're pretty steady, stable parents. But this day they were over a barbecue, as things could go. So I'm in the back seat of the car and we're leaving, and I'm telling my mom and dad about these men I saw, and they didn't want to hear it. They didn't believe me. They really didn't want to hear it. They didn't believe me. They just kind of brushed me aside, and I felt rejected. And I told myself that day, I will remember this for the rest of my life. I will share it with people, and it's my little treasure. And I've carried it since I was that tall to now. I'm getting to be an old man. And I want to tell you, the angels are real, like the Bible says they are. We don't see them all the time, but they're real. And they are beautifully magnificent. The sort of company you want to be in. Strong and just good and pure and beautiful and mighty. And they're not gods, but they exist in the same family that you and I belong to, as if we're Christians. And I've got a lot of other stories to tell you. That's the first one. And I believe God gave me these things to tell you about these things. I've experienced darker things in my life, and that is a different set of work. I will not mix those stories in with these stories of God and His work and His angels. I've got a lot more stories to tell you, and I'm starting to feel a little more comfortable with the camera, so maybe they'll go better. But they're real. Trust me, they're real. Just like the Bible says. And just like the Bible says they are. And they're part of our family. They are. So, thank you, and stay tuned for the next story.